My name is Abby. I'm a children's and teen librarian at the Patchogue-Medford Library. I teach all of our sewing programs here, and today I'm going to teach you the basics so that you can learn from home. This is part 3 of the series. Today we're going to be learning about improv sewing, and you can register for some really fun improv sewing programs during the summer. Summer 2023. So if you're watching this in the future, you can just use this video to improv sew at home. Check our description below for parts 1 and 2 so you can learn about the parts of the machine and how to thread one. We are going to I'm going to show you how to do an improv quilt block. This summer of 2023, Patchogue-Medford Library is doing a Quilting for a Cause program where you can come in and pick up a quilting kit that you can sew at home or that you can sew here you can make an appointment with our makerspace, another, shameless plug. And you can use a machine here in the building and you can sew one of these quilt blocks. We're going to get them all together at the end of the summer and make quilts, hopefully more than one quilt, for Project Blindness. If you don't know what Project Blindness is, they do a lot of great work for kids. They collect and donate blankets to children in need. So if you do come in and get a quilt kit, this is kind of what you'll find in there. You'll find a little piece of paper, some strips of fabric, and some squares. So I'm going to show you what we're going to do with these. I'm going to use this one because I really like this one. So if you've done any quilting before, you know that quilting is supposed to be very precise. All of your angles line up, everything matches really perfectly. You use a ruler for everything, and then it's a practice in perfection. This is improv quilting, so it's not like that. You just cut off wherever you want. And that is kind of just where I feel like cutting this angle off. For this block, you're going to cut one corner off at any angle you want. So if you want to cut straight across the middle, you can. If you only want to cut off that little bit right there, you can do that. And you can cut off like a sharper angle like mine. You can cut one even sharper than this, or you can do like a perfect equilateral triangle. Well, right triangle, because that's a right angle. But you can do this however you feel like it. So I'm going to do that with that one, and maybe on this one I will make a more even cut and just cut off a little part right there. And you can tell that this is not perfect. I got a little angle going up here. I'm not worrying about that because this improv quilting is supposed to be less precise and more creative. So I'm just doing what kind of feels right to me. So that's your first step, is to cut off those corners. And then we're going to move over to our sewing machines to do the next steps. I have, and you will have in your kit, and if you are just doing this at home for yourself or for something that's not library related, have like a variety of strips of fabric on hand. So I've got a bunch of different colors. I'm going to try to make this kind of like warmer in the middle, cooler on the outside. So I'm going to take one of the greens to start with. And this is just because I think that's going to look good. So again, when you're doing improv quilting, you kind of just do whatever you feel looks right. And like with traditional quilting, you always have that perfect 1/4 inch seam. If you're new to sewing, a perfect 1/4 inch seam is really hard to do. So if you're new and this is your first time, don't worry about that. It doesn't need to be perfect. I usually like to just kind of line the edge of my fabric up with the edge of my presser foot, and that gives me a pretty nice straight line. If you want to move your needle around so that you're about a 1/4 inch from the edge of your presser foot, you can do that. I'm just going to change. So on this machine, that stitch width dial, that will change where the needle is. So I'm just going to move my needle about to what I think is approximately a 1/4 inch. And again, it's improv sewing. We don't need to be perfect. On the instructions in my sheet, I like to put that, like, when you're doing improv quilting, before you start, you should like do something silly. hula hoop or spin in circles or scribble like you're 5, because this is something that shouldn't be high pressure perfectionism. So if you struggle with perfectionism, improv quilting might be a good thing to do. So usually when you are sewing, you'll use this back stitch lever to give yourself a little bit of a back stitch, and that will lock your sewing in place. When you are quilting though, you are gonna sew this block to another block, and you're gonna sew over your stitches anyway, so that's gonna lock those in place. We just don't need the extra bulk, so we're gonna forget about that for now. And we're just gonna sew. So I am going to just sew a few pieces on here and show you how that goes, and then we'll move on back to our iron and trimming. You'll notice that I'm using gray thread for this. Actually, I'm gonna make that stitch a little smaller. I'm using gray thread for this, and that's just because it's a pretty nice neutral, so when you open it up, you're not really gonna be able to see. If you're sewing a quilt that is white, you might wanna use a lighter gray or a white, but that is entirely up to you. All right, I'm gonna add, I think, a little tiny strip of yellow. And with this, I'm just gonna see, will that fit in that space? Yeah, that'll cover the whole space. So with quilting, like with other sewing, I'm matching right sides together so that you can see all of the pretty fabrics on the outside when you're done sewing, and you can hide all of your seams in the back. So I've got this right sides together, and we're just gonna sew the next seam. All right. I like this orange for next. And if you have sewn or quilted before, you know that you usually press your seams, you iron your seams flat. I'm not sewing over those seams right now, so I am not doing that yet. I'll just do them all together at the end. All right, and now I've got this kind of like wonky shape right here. I'd like them all to be strips, and all of my kits are gonna have strips and not any weird shapes like this. So I'm gonna cut this off, and I think I'm gonna put a little of one of the pinks. I think I can fit one of those on the corner. So again, this doesn't need to be perfect. Usually when you're quilting, you would put a quilting ruler on here and make sure that you are cutting a perfect whatever distance, but I am just going to slice it where I think I want it. And if you want to make sure that your next color is going to be on your final piece, you can always line it up with that. And yeah, I'm definitely gonna have some coverage there. So I want this piece to be right there. Just like that. I might even want to cut off a little of that bluish purple. So I'm just going to sew it like this, and then I'll cut that off when I'm done. right, so that is done. Now I'm going to press it and slice all the extra edges off, and you'll see what the completed block looks like. This is another thing that's different about improv sewing than improv quilting than traditional quilting. In traditional quilting, you kind of press the seams in certain directions. In improv quilting, you press them in whatever direction they fall or wherever you feel like. So like that one's going that way, I'm just gonna press that way. Some people will even press, like this one you can see wants to fall both ways. I am gonna press them both in one direction because I don't want there to be like a weird bulkiness in that spot. But if you don't care about that, you can also just press your iron down on it and see where everything lands. So we're just gonna press all of these seams flat. Those of you who are not very familiar with irons or ironing, when you are done with your hot iron, put it up on its bottom so that it doesn't burn a hole through your table. I'm gonna turn that off. Also, when you're done with it, make sure you turn it off. Most irons will automatically turn off, but I just like to be sure. All right. And then here is my block. And here's my little template. So with quilting, traditional quilting, you usually are using a lot of rulers. I have like a traditional quilting ruler here. So you usually would use a clear ruler to make sure that you got very precise cuts. With improv quilting, we aren't using any of that stuff. The only straight edge type thing we're gonna use is this. And this is only to cut off all of our edges at the end to make sure that your beautiful blocks will match up with everybody else who sewed a block. So I'm using a rotary cutter. You can also use scissors. You can pin this template onto your block and cut it out using scissors if you don't have a cutter and a mat. I really just like to use these because they're easy and I can just keep everything nice and flat. So this is the very first quilt block for our Avogato community quilt that we'll be donating to Project Blindness. So I really hope that you guys join us and come in and grab some quilt block kits and help sew up some quilts for that really awesome awesome project.